Today, we're continuing the theme of invitation, and we do so by doing some inner work to find out who we are and what makes us tick. Perhaps for some of you, you may have already figured that out by the time you hit puberty, in which case I say to you, congratulations! You must be so bored right now and probably for the rest of your life. Me, on the other hand, or is it I, on the other hand, my high school days were far from being enjoyable. In fact, it was pretty darn miserable, to be honest with you. I never felt like I belonged, with some of my identities, especially being undocumented, speaking English with a very thick accent, and those darn pimples showing up everywhere, even parts of my body that I never even knew existed. But the deepest, most tucked away secret of all was my budding sexuality, which I thought would surely bring about my ruin if the few friends that I had were to find out about it, or my parents and other family members were to find out, let alone the fundamentalist Christian church I attended. Certainly, the word authenticity was not part of my vocabulary at the time. To say that I did not feel comfortable in my own skin would have been a great understatement. In the meantime, I thought I would simply try to fake it till I made it, or at least try to pretend to be someone I'm not by, for example, going to the prom with my straight female friend. To be fair, she did know I wasn't all that interested in her in that way anyway. And I did muster up enough courage to at least come out to her and another one of my close friends. And over the years, I've come to learn that being an imposter simply takes up too much time, effort, and energy. It's much easier to simply be myself. Though I must admit, it's kind of a lifelong process, right? And I'm still discovering who I am to this very day. Oscar Wilde once said, be yourself. Everybody else is taken. I love that. After all, how many of us actually escape the birth lottery? I'm looking around the Zoom room here and I'm not seeing any Zoom hands being raised. None of us chose which egg and sperm would come together to produce who we are today, or what our upbringing was going to be like for that matter. I believe the only control we have is how to view ourselves when we wake up each morning and stare at that mirror. Are we showing up as our truest, highest, and best self today? And of course, the challenge is to maintain that version of ourselves throughout the rest of the day without losing track of our core identity, no matter what others may have to say about us. Last week, I saw the play 1939. This is the program booklet for it. I don't know how many of you have seen the play. It's going to be playing for a few more weeks. And this play is set at an Anglican forced Indigenous boarding school in Northern Ontario, back in, of course, 1939, right? And the play goes in honor of a royal visit from His Majesty King George VI and his wife, Queen Elizabeth. No, not that Queen Elizabeth who just died recently, but rather the Queen Mum, right? Was showing up to Canada. So their teacher, Miss App Daffyd, decided to put together a production of Shakespeare's All's Well That Ends Well. Now, I must tell you that when that was mentioned, the audience burst into ironic laughter because, as the name of the play implies, we all know that unfortunately, that's not how it ended for many Indigenous children who were placed in these residential schools. All did not end well for them, to say the least. And another irony is when Miss Dafford asked the students to speak, and the production should be spoken with a British accent in order for it to sound more authentic for their royal highnesses. Now, the reason why that's ironic is because Miss Dafford herself is Welsh, and she had to learn what proper British English sounds like. And as I mentioned earlier, English is not my first language either. It's more like my fifth, right? And to be very honest, um, I have trouble reading Shakespeare and comprehending what the heck he's talking about in high school. It was almost like learning a sixth language because, to be honest, again, Billy was not one of my favorites. Sorry, don't hate me for that, people. I know for all you Shakespeare fans out there. I could still empathize, however, with the students in the play who struggled with memorizing their lines. And, in the play, they had to employ all kinds of techniques and tricks and movements in order to learn how to speak in iambic pentameter. And one of the students, Susan Blackbird, was eventually able to crack that code by channeling her Mohawk ancestors, who also happened to be medicine healers. Now, the way she did this was by placing these European characters into a Northern Ontario context, which in turn made the play seem more authentically Canadian, which was how the local newspaper described it. And the rest unfolds in Act Two. So I'm not going to be a spoiler and tell you how it ends. And besides, Wendy and Peter are gonna go see it this afternoon anyway. So you'll find out soon enough. There's clearly a lot going on there in this play in terms of authenticity when it comes to language, and all kinds of internalized oppression shows up, even for the teacher who happens to be white, right? But whose culture was also erased through colonization. And that oppression then gets transferred onto others, because we all know that pain that is not transformed is transmitted. No one benefits when we pretend to be someone we're not, and when we're not living our full, authentic selves. And of course, these days, there's been a lot of attention given to what happened at these residential schools, as I alluded to earlier. There was a fascinating article in the New York Times this past week about the controversy around exhuming the bones and the remains that were discovered 3 years ago, and what proper respect means these days. And these are certainly lively conversations as we commemorate the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation on the 30th this month. Today, there's the bigger question of who is a Canadian and what it means to be, quote unquote, authentically Canadian is such a hot topic with the recent influx of refugees and even foreign workers like myself. I remember when I was living in LA, I talked to a white woman who was originally from Montreal. She said, I don't care where someone was born or what color their skin is, as long as they value beauty and cleanliness and keep the streets of Montreal beautiful and clean. Because after all, she says, that's what makes Montreal, Montreal. And it made me realize that authenticity doesn't just have to do with your core identity or where you were born, the color of your skin, or any of that. But it also has to do with your core values and honoring those values. And that's certainly what I picked up on when I heard US Vice President Kamala Harris do her first interview as a presidential candidate. I don't know how many of you also caught that on television. But when she was asked why she changed her position from back when she ran for president in 2019, she said that her values have not changed. And apparently, though, through her experiences the past 3.5 years, she has been able to make a more pragmatic approach when it comes to different issues. Now, I'm not saying I totally agree with her current positions, but I actually have more respect for people who are able to hold their opinions lightly and take the time to listen to various perspectives and perhaps change their minds along the way. For me, it doesn't make her any less authentic. It just means that she could both be anchored in her core values with the freedom to evolve over time. Isn't that what that song, Spirit of Life, is all about? Roots hold me close, wings set me free. It's managing that delicate tension between the two. So getting back to the play in 1939, I think the students were able to eventually find authenticity in the form of self-differentiation. That was their subtle way of practicing resistance in the face of oppression. Because while their teacher asked them to bring Shakespeare to life by using their own voice, that's what they actually did. They both honored the task they were given while staying true to their indigenous roots and respecting their own ancestors. In other words, it's that whole concept in family systems theory around self-differentiation, knowing where you end and where another person begins. Authenticity doesn't mean that you have to give up who you are. I love that Brene Brown quote where she says, authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. Authenticity is when your outside matches your inside and not letting outside influences determine who you are on the inside. Ideally, our job is to affirm who someone else is, as well as affirming who we are, because we are confident enough in terms of who we view ourselves to be. It becomes a mutual invitation process to show up as our full, authentic selves. Now, let me read that quote from Michelle Obama again, because someone in the chat box said they loved that quote and that reading. She says, let's invite one another in. Maybe then we can begin to fear less, to make fewer wrong assumptions, to let go of the biases and the stereotypes that unnecessarily divide us. Maybe we can better embrace the ways we are the same. It's not about being perfect. It's not about where you get yourself in the end. There's power in allowing yourself to be known and heard, in owning your unique story, in using your authentic voice. And there's grace in being willing to know and hear others. This, for me, is how we become. Becoming, as you may know, is in fact the title of her book and where this passage comes from. Each of us is in the process of becoming, which so resonates with my own process theology, right? That we're all in the process of evolving and becoming. Becoming also implies that we're not there yet, and we'll probably never be fully able to know ourselves and or even others in this lifetime, and that's okay as well. We can learn to embrace imperfection while knowing we're perfect just the way we are. There's no shame in any of our identities, and we can find peace when we let go of other people's expectations of who we ought to be as well. I hope that as we move into our new neighborhood in Oakwood Vaughan, which, by the way, is one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Toronto, if not the world, that as we move in next spring, that we do so in an authentic way, meaning that we first figure out who we are and then hold our opinions lightly, as well as letting go of our assumptions of others. Instead, let's take all the time we need to listen to their stories and find both commonalities and differences, to know where we end and where they begin. That's when we could then share our stories from an authentic place from deep within us, to both hear and to be heard. For me, that's how authentic relationships develop. And that's how we truly live into our third principle of acceptance of one another. I now invite us to listen to that still small voice from within, to take a few deep breaths and reflect for a moment on who we are, where we end, and where another begins, and to reflect on what it would mean to truly accept one another.